A story that will grip your heart and mind. What would you do if your child was tormented every day, pushed to the edge, and no one cared? How far can a mother go to protect her child? What if that mother held a power that no one could imagine, a power she had buried for years? This is not just a story. It's a battle between love and cruelty, between the past and the present, between revenge and mercy. And the real question is, what would you choose? Get ready for A Mother's Revenge, a gripping, emotional, and suspenseful journey that will leave you breathless. Watch till the end, because the last twist will change everything. In a remote Nigerian village, where lush forests and red earth shimmered under the scorching sun, a young girl named Amoka lived with her mother, Ifuma. Amoka was bright, sensitive, and courageous, but school had become a nightmare for her. "Mother, Mrs. A hates me," Amoka sobbed. Ifuma pulled her daughter close, running her fingers through her hair. "My child, the world always tries to bring down those who shine the brightest. We must endure." Amoka wiped her tears, but the pain in her young face was undeniable. She knew that Mrs. A's hatred stemmed from one thing. Amoka was the best student in class, and Mrs. A wanted her own daughter, Grace, to always be on top. The worst part? The other students had joined in. They tore her books, threw her bag, and called her cursed girl. One day, Amoka came home with bruises on her arm and a cut on her lip. Ifuma's heart clenched at the sight. "Who did this to you?" Ifuma's voice trembled. "They pushed me down the stairs." Mrs. A saw, but she said nothing. Amoka's voice was small, filled with pain. This wasn't the first time Ifuma had seen her daughter hurt, but today, something inside her cracked. For a brief moment, she felt an old fire stirring within her. "I will do something, my child. I promise." But could she? Or was she just an ordinary woman, powerless against cruelty? That night, under the moonlight, Ifuma sat beneath a tree, staring at the sky. "Can I go back to that path?" A whisper in the wind. A shadow in her mind. She had once been a spirit guardian, a woman blessed with supernatural powers, a protector of the innocent. But a tragic event had led her to bury her abilities and choose an ordinary life. But now, her daughter's suffering was awakening something within her. The next morning, Ifuma marched into the school, straight into Mrs. A's office. "If you lay a hand on my daughter again, I will show you something you have never dreamed of." Mrs. A laughed, but for a moment, doubt flickered in her eyes. "You can't do anything." Ifuma met her gaze, unblinking. Something shifted in the air. Mrs. A felt a strange chill creep over her skin. That night, Ifuma had a dream. A dark forest, a whispering shadow, a voice calling her. "You are our heir, but you abandoned us. It is time to return." She jolted away. The air around her was vibrating. She knew, silence was no longer an option. The next day, as Mrs. A raised her hand to strike Amoka, the classroom windows slammed shut. The children screamed. Mrs. A stepped back, trembling. At the door stood Ifuma, but she no longer looked ordinary. Her eyes glowed with an eerie light. What is happening?" Mrs. A stammered. A whisper filled the room. "It is time." Mrs. A's allies, powerful figures secretly fearing Ifuma's return, gathered in the shadows. "We must stop her," one of them hissed. But they didn't realize, Ifuma was unstoppable. On a stormy night, outside the school, the final confrontation began. Thunder rumbled, trees swayed violently, and a supernatural glow surrounded Ifuma. Mrs. A and her followers chanted an ancient spell, but as soon as the words left their lips, the earth trembled beneath them. Mrs. A fell to the ground, tears in her eyes. I beg for mercy," she cried. Amoka held her mother's hand. "Mom, we shouldn't become like them." Ifuma closed her eyes, inhaling deeply. Sometimes, mercy is more powerful than revenge. After that day, Mrs. A was removed from the school. Amoka was safe again. Ifuma made a decision. She would no longer hide her powers, but she would use them to protect, not to destroy. And so, a mother's love had not only saved her daughter but also healed her own soul. The end? Or the beginning of another story?